I want to cast your mind back a few months, to the times before crafting, to the dark days before patch number 4, Blessings of the Omnissiah, went live. It's the 9th of February 2023, and Fatshark have just published this blog post, where they outline their intentions with the forthcoming crafting system. Specifically, I'd like you to cast your eyes over this particular paragraph. We'll give it a little read in just a moment, but first some context. This paragraph talks about the Fuse Blessing feature that didn't make it into the finalized version of the crafting system. This would have functioned by allowing the player to combine 3 blessings of the same type and tier to earn a blessing of the next tier up, giving players an alternative route to collecting tier 4 blessings. However, it was not to be, and here is the reasoning they gave. The first major change from the previous crafting implementation we discussed is that we will not be implementing the fuse/combined blessing functionality. Instead, earning a blessing will permanently unlock the ability to re-bless with that blessing at any time. This is the important part. We made this decision as it complements where we will be taking blessings in the future, and it greatly alleviates the number of items that one would need to acquire, not only the ability to re-bless, but also what you can re-bless with. As stated in the previous section about equipment, we expect players to switch and try out new weapons as they discover different and exciting potential combinations and builds. Earning the ability to permanently re-bless allows for a far more enjoyable and less time-consuming experience, and an easier time experimenting with interesting builds for your characters. So from this paragraph, we can deduce a couple of things. The official statement behind the decision to nix the Fuse Blessing part of the crafting system was to, quote marks, greatly alleviate the number of items a player would need to acquire, and the developers expected players to switch and try out new weapons as they discover different and exciting potential combinations and builds, and that the system we got without Fuse Blessing is supposed to be a less time-consuming experience and make it easier to experiment with interesting builds for your characters. Well, fuck knows what they make of the current crafting system then, because by their own statement of intent, the crafting system we have is a total and abject failure. Not only have Fatshark managed to make a crafting system that requires an enormous amount of invested resources and player time, it also actively discourages players from experimenting with builds and is in absolutely no way interesting at all. Hindsight really is 2020 and all that, but revisiting this blog post is actually fucking hilarious when you read it closely and realize just how badly they missed the mark here. So let's take a look over everything that's gone wrong here so we can better understand why this crafting system probably just needs a total do-over at some point down the line. Okay, so here I am at Brun, and for the purpose of today's experiment, I'll be trying to get myself a good Elise foresword on my Psycho. As you can see here, I've got 311,000-ish gold on my persons, and a bunch of crafting resources ready to go. So let's first engage in the brunt section of the crafting loop. All right, so where are we? Here we go. And now it's time for fun. Okay. Right, so as you can see, I spent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Oh, but look at that. There's just not a single one here with the modifiers I want. Okay, so that's all that's all wasted now. And it looks like, you know what, guys? I'm actually just gonna fast forward this part for you, so it's a little faster on the watching. Aha! Oh, but look at that. The finesse roll is bricked. Yep, doesn't even matter. Okay, well, you know what? Just for the sake of speeding this along, here's a fine Elise. It's not quite what I wanted, but it will do. So now it's time for the next part of our fun experiment. What I'm actually looking to do here is craft an Elise that has both the deflector and slaughterer blessings on it, because those are the blessings that I think are good, and I would like to get both of those on a 4-sword so I can play with them and enjoy Darktide with those two blessings. So let's give it a go here. We'll consecrate that. 25 versus unyielding, so that is not very good. Superiority, yeah, that is not very good. 25 versus unarmored. It's okay. Not too bad, I suppose. Dreg bruisers, and then... Oh, no. Look at that. Cool. Okay, so I didn't really get anything I wanted on that. That's okay, because we'll just change it, right? Because I've got all these blessings in my blessing bank, so I'll just go over here, and you know, we'll put level 4 deflector on. Oh no! What's this? I now have to do this entire process again because this blessing slot, which I would like to put Slaughter on, is now locked. So this sword, which I spent around 200,000 gold on, and, you know, however much plasteel and diamantine there, is worthless to me. It's not what I want. In fact, I've actually already pretty much got this exact sword already. You know, I've been trying to do this a couple of times, actually, as you may can tell. So here's an Elise 4 sword. Here's another Elise 4 sword. Now, this one I did get Slaughter on, but no deflector, right? And again, I had to buy multiple Elise 4 swords to get this result. So there you have it. Darktide's crafting system in action. As you saw for yourself, I went from the first dice rolling machine, my boy Brunt, to the second dice rolling machine, my lady Hadron, and then when I attempted to use a wee bit of player agency there to make the weapon that I actually wanted to make, the weapon locked. If you're watching this, I assume you're well aware of how this terrible crafting system works, so please excuse the theatricality in that last part, but the point is that you've probably lost countless resources, weapons, and of course your valuable time to these fucking locks. And like me, you probably despise it. That's because what we have in Darktide is not a crafting system, it's a gambling system. Now, I've turned this over in my head, and the only reason I can logically come up with for why Fatshark decided on this whole locking system is because they fundamentally do not understand their own game. The only reason I can discern for these locks existing is because Fatshark do not want players to have agency with crafting. And if we assume that to be the case, the only logical reason they would not want that is because they do not want players to craft optimized gear, because then players would have no carrot to chase and therefore stop playing the game. This takes us neatly back to my statement that Fatshark do not understand their own game. People don't play Tide games to get gear. They never have. The gear is always a means to an end. Tide games, and by extension Wave Clear co-op games, are generally played because they're fun games that focus on an enjoyable and replayable gaming loop, and gear in these types of games generally serve as a means to an end, with that end being build diversity. By making gear in Darktide the objective and not simply a component of how a player can build their character, they've actually cheapened the experience of their own gameplay loop by putting an artificial barrier in front of players looking to experiment with interesting builds for their characters. But the locks aren't the only culprit here. It gets worse. So on paper, perks are kind of okay. You can pick and choose between extra damage versus certain enemy types, better block efficiency, faster reload, etc, etc. On paper, seems fine. That illusion is quickly dispelled when you realize that the majority of enemies in the game fall under one of 3 armor categories: unarmored, flak, and maniac. That's right, these 3 armor types constitute 80% of the threats you will face in Darktide, and no, I do not consider Poxwalkers a threat. So we have 3 damage versus armor type perks that are actually useful, and the rest not really. They might as well not exist because 99% of the time they don't actually do anything. And what do I mean by that? Well, extra damage versus whatever doesn't really matter in Darktide unless it allows you to hit a new breakpoint. If 20% versus flak means you can kill a scab mauler in 2 hits instead of 3, well then that extra damage versus flak has value. If that same perk does not allow the player to hit a new breakpoint, then it's pretty much as good as worthless. So after peeling back the veneer of choice, we can actually see that we have no real choice at all. Ideally, almost every weapon in the game will want some combination of damage versus maniac, flak, or unarmored. Nothing particularly interesting about that to experiment with. The end result here is that anything that isn't one of these 3 desired perks is considered at best a mediocre result, and at worst a bricked one, meaning useless. And when one of your perk slots is permanently locked, you have no choice but to go back to the drawing board and start over again to get the desired best perk. Blessings are much the same. Again, we have the illusion of choice with there being multiple blessings per weapon family. Again, seems good on the surface. But when you dive into this pool of choice, you realize there is a great deal of overlap between blessings, B, some blessings that are just straight up terrible, and C, some that are so unbelievably brokenly strong that there is just 0 point in experimenting with interesting builds with other blessings. And of course, even if you did want to experiment, you couldn't because locks. Going through each point here, starting with A, let's look at Head Taker versus Decimator as an example. Both blessings give you a stackable damage buff on hit. However, you must make the mind-boggling decision of whether you want the one that gives you a little less damage but doesn't disappear if you miss a hit, or the one that gives you more damage but disappears if you swing and miss. Absolutely riveting choice there, and super interesting game design. Point B really needs no explanation, as there is nothing interesting about a bad blessing, whether it's bad because it does nothing or because it's super situational or whatever. Bad is bad, not interesting, not worth talking about. Which leads me to point C, and arguably the main offender here, the blessings that are so strong and so obviously auto takes that they render the rest of them just a total waste of design space. This vaunted category is home to such offerings as brutal momentum on axes, pinning fire on bolters and auto pistols, thrust and slaughterer on any weapon that can run thrust and slaughterer. You get the idea. If there is a definitive best set of blessings, then there is no real choice because all the other choices are just bad or superfluous. So between the locks and the sheer amount of bloat in both perks and blessings, with only a handful being useful and coveted by players, you have a loot and crafting system that requires hundreds of items and thousands of resources to actually get the thing you want, funnels players towards auto-pick weapons, blessings, and perks, and therefore disincentivizes players from exploring different builds to experience the fun of playing Darktide in new ways. That's a big fucking red flag, by the way, Fatshark. And of course, wastes hours upon hours of player time. So there you have it, gang. This crafting system is a sham. It's a joke. It's an absolute catastrophe by Fatshark's own metrics, and at this point, the game and the player base would best be served by having it gutted and entirely remade. That's probably not going to happen, so best case scenario for the immediate future, get rid of the fucking locks and maybe do a development pass over perks, enemy types, and blessings, and, you know, try clean up some of that bloat. But what do you guys think? Are you happy with the locks? Have I got it all wrong here? If you've got some thoughts on this, do consider leaving a comment below and we'll get a discussion going. That's going to be it for now. If this video does well, then I might make a solution-orientated video with some ideas on how this system can be salvaged or redone in a way that's actually engaging. But that's magical Christmas land, so yeah, let me know if that's something you're interested in. Anyway, bye-bye for now.